In the shadow of the Rustwater swamps, where the earth is soft enough to swallow cattle and whole houses have been known to sink into the mud, there is a mansion long abandoned, but never truly empty. Its walls sag with moisture, its windows are slick with mildew, and its floors groan as if under the weight of voices that never left. Locals call it the house where vows echoed, though no one can agree who first whispered that name. The story that clings to it is not told in daylight. It is passed in half-phrases over bar counters, muttered around gas station coffee pots, or hinted at in the pews of backwater churches when the sermon edges too close to sin. The tale is always the same, of a woman, her mother, and a husband who blurred the sacred lines of family until bloodlines coiled back upon themselves in a knot no preacher could bless and no law could untangle. The woman, they say, was pale and slight, with hair the color of swamp reeds. She lived beneath her mother's roof, where a man already occupied the role of husband. He was older, broad-shouldered, with eyes that never softened even when he smiled. This man was her mother's chosen partner, yet before long he was more than that. He became entwined in ways unspoken, ways neighbors dared not confront. Years later, the horror multiplied. For when the woman's daughter came of age, that same man, the one who had been both stepfather and forbidden companion, took the girl as his bride. In that house, beneath beams that still bear their initials carved in uneven lines, a wedding was whispered into being. No minister was present, no legal record was ever filed, but the vows were spoken all the same, and the family sealed a union that twisted 3 generations into a single thread. To outsiders, the swamp was already cursed, lanterns bobbing where no path lay, voices carrying over water though no boat moved, children vanishing into the fog and never returning. But to those who knew the house, the curse was human first, and only afterward did the land begin to sour. People say you can still hear it at night if you stand near the rotted veranda. 3 voices layered atop each other. A woman whispering, a mother weeping, and a child trembling through vows she never chose. And the wind carries those echoes into the cypress trees, where owls fall silent and the mud bubbles as though the swamp itself remembers. The strangest thing about the house by the Rustwater swamp isn't just its sagging timbers or the vines that crawl into its chimneys, it's the absence of records. Courthouses in that county, even in the late 1800s, prided themselves on meticulous ledgers. Births, marriages, and deaths inked in careful script. Yet for this family, whole pages are missing. Researchers have noted gaps, a daughter born, yet no father's name written. A marriage listed for the mother, but her groom's identity smudged beyond recognition, as if someone pressed a wet thumb into the ink before it dried. And when the daughter herself reached marrying age, no line in the ledgers marks her union. Nothing official exists, only silence, only omissions that seem too precise to be accidents. Neighbors remembered more than paper did. They whispered of lantern-lit gatherings on nights when the swamp fog rolled in heavy. Men with stern faces, women clutching hymnals, children pressed into pews inside the house's parlor, turned into a chapel for the night. No priest stood at the front, only the man himself, reading from a warped Bible whose spine cracked as he turned the pages. In that room, with candles trembling in glass jars, vows were spoken between kin who should never have been paired. One old woman recalled that when she was a girl, her mother forbade her from playing near the swamp house, not because it was dangerous, she said, but because their children had eyes that followed too long. As though they knew things no child should? No. Another swore she saw the mother and daughter, both wearing rings of identical design, thin silver bands, etched with crude symbols that weren't crosses but something else, loops within loops, circles without end. By the 1920s, stories of deformities began to surface. Babies born weak, some never breathing past the first night, others with features too alike to deny what had happened. A doctor, who came once and never returned, wrote in a private note, "The swamp is breeding its own sorrow. This is not natural, nor is it chance." That note survived only because it was tucked into a Bible in a neighboring farmstead. discovered decades later. Yet the family endured. They guarded their silence the way other families guarded heirlooms. Outsiders were kept at bay, sometimes by threats, other times by the swamp itself, which seemed to rise in defense of its chosen house. Travelers lost their way, compasses spun, and boats capsized in water no deeper than a man's chest. "The swamp don't like strangers," the locals would mutter. But beneath that simple phrase lay another truth: the swamp protects its secrets. Still, remnants escaped. A wedding veil found floating downstream, stained with mildew, but delicate enough to reveal embroidery. 3 initials, interlaced in ways that blurred names together. A letter with only one surviving line: "He has bound us all, and the circle cannot be broken." The deeper researchers dug, the more the past seemed to resist them. Ledgers burned in courthouse fires. Diaries vanished from attics. Photographs turned up blackened or blurred, as if time itself refused to show faces too entangled to name. And yet, the story persists in the only way curses ever do: in whispers. A mother, a daughter, and a groom who moved between them, as though vows were his to reassign. The house still stands, though barely, its roof caving like a skull split in 2. And when the wind hisses through its corridors, some swear they hear not one voice, but 3. Layered, entangled, bound together in a vow that the swamp itself remembers. The deeper one looks into the house by the Rustwater swamp, the harder it becomes to separate fact from horror. The family did not simply blur boundaries once, they repeated it, generation after generation, until kinship itself dissolved into something grotesque. And the swamp, ever watchful, seemed to drink their secrets, swelling with every sin whispered beneath its cypress trees. The first betrayal, it began with the mother. She had taken the man as her husband, a broad-shouldered figure with a voice that could command silence in any room. Yet before long he turned his gaze toward her daughter. Some say the mother gave silent consent, too frightened to oppose him. Others insist she believed it was divine will, that keeping him in the family, even across generations, was a holy duty. Whatever the reason, the girl became both stepdaughter and bride, and her own mother's rival. Witnesses later described seeing the 3 of them together at Sunday gatherings. The man sat at the center, the mother at his right, the daughter at his left. Their rings gleamed the same. When hymns were sung, their voices rose in unison, weaving a harmony so unnatural that even seasoned churchgoers turned pale. Children from neighboring farms whispered that the family's table always had 3 empty chairs, as though waiting for ghosts, or perhaps for the roles to shift again. The second binding, when the daughter bore a child, the cycle did not stop. By the time her girl grew to adolescence, the same man, gray now, his body thickened by years, claimed her too. Neighbors reported lanterns glowing in the parlor long past midnight, shadows moving in patterns that suggested a ceremony. And though no preacher ever stepped foot in that place, vows were spoken once again. This time, a child became her own mother's rival, and the lines of kinship knotted tighter still. What emerged was a lineage so tangled that no genealogist could map it. A man stood as husband, stepfather, and groom to multiple generations at once. Women in the same household became mother, sister, daughter, and wife, depending on who was speaking. And the children, those fragile offspring, grew up reciting titles that contradicted themselves. One might call his grandmother sister. Another might address his uncle as father. Teachers who tried to enroll them grew confused, eventually giving up altogether. The children of the swamp it is here that the horror deepens beyond scandal. Because the children born of these unions did not emerge unscathed. Doctors recorded cases, though most notes vanished, of infants with limbs that would not straighten, eyes that never focused, or spines bent like fishing hooks. Some children lived but carried faces so alike that outsiders whispered the family was not breeding children at all, but replicas. The swamp absorbed their suffering. Neighbors spoke of hearing cries carried over the water, high-pitched and endless, yet when they searched, no one was there. Hunters found small graves hidden among the cypress knees, wooden crosses that rotted quickly, leaving only mounds of disturbed soil. In some cases, bones washed up during floods pale against the black mud. One coroner, hardened by decades of death, reportedly dropped his pen when he realized the skeleton before him had both infant and adolescent features, as though the body had aged and stopped again. Rituals of binding inside the house, rituals replaced law. Diaries, rare scraps that escaped fire, hinted at prayers whispered not to Christ, but to the blood itself. The circle must hold, one line read. If the vow is broken, the swamp will take us whole. Another mentioned a hymn sung during weddings that repeated the phrase, one blood, one bond, one breath. Survivors who fled much later described dinners where the man raised a glass and forced every family member to drink in order, beginning with the eldest woman and ending with the youngest girl. Bread was broken and shared, but always in pairs, mother with daughter, grandmother with granddaughter, as if mimicking Holy Communion while mocking it in secret. Attempts to escape, not all submitted. Stories survive of daughters who tried to flee across the swamp at night, guided only by lanterns. Most never made it. Their bodies surfaced days later, swollen with water, their faces turned toward the house, as though even in death they were forced to look back. One woman did escape, traveling 3 counties away. But when questioned years later, she said little. Only that her dreams were filled with the sound of vows whispered in her ear, though no one was beside her. The swamp's revenge locals grew convinced the land itself rebelled. Storms tore through the valley more violently than elsewhere. Lightning struck the church bell, splitting it in half. The swamp bubbled in places where no spring ran, releasing the stench of sulfur. Livestock refused to drink from its edge, and dogs howled if forced near the house. One fisherman swore that he saw faces in the water, pale, round, distorted, opening their mouths as though to speak. He abandoned his boat and never returned. Another man claimed he walked past the house at dusk and heard 3 women praying in unison. Though the building was already abandoned, the last line by the mid-20th century, the family had nearly vanished. Fires consumed much of the house, though its skeleton still stands. Graves became overgrown, yet DNA studies of locals decades later revealed concentrations of shared bloodlines, so dense that researchers concluded a closed circle had persisted far longer than typical in rural communities. The findings were buried quickly, out of respect or fear, and still people whisper. Some say the swamp keeps the children, their spirits bound to the mud. Others claim the house still holds 3 voices, the mother, the daughter, and the child, speaking vows that refuse to die. The swamp does not forget. Long after the family's voices were silenced, the Rustwater hollow remained restless, as though the earth itself carried memory. What was born in sin did not dissolve with time. It lingered, soaking into soil and marrow, whispering its own vows to anyone who dared to step too close. The house that refuses to die, the remains of the family home still stand, though charred and skeletal. Boards lean at impossible angles, as if the house itself is straining to listen. In storms, winds whistle through the cracks, producing moans that neighbors once mistook for cries. On calm nights, travelers swear they hear floorboards shifting under unseen weight. Some even say they glimpse lantern light inside, though the windows are empty. A local boy who dared to enter returned pale and shivering. He claimed he saw 3 figures seated at a table, unmoving, their faces half-shadowed. When he blinked, they were gone, but the plates remained, each with a ring of dust where food once lay. He refused to speak after that, save one phrase. They're still waiting for the vows. Dreams that spread, those who settle near Rustwater complain of dreams not their own. A woman who moved into the valley in the 1970s described waking nightly to the sensation of a man's voice reciting vows in her ear. Another reported her daughter speaking in her sleep, repeating the phrase, one blood, one bond, one breath. The girl had never read the family's diaries. Such dreams pass from parent to child, just as the curse once did. Some families move away, abandoning land they had worked for decades. Others remain, insisting the swamp's pull is only folklore. But their children grow quiet and strange, often staring into the water at dusk, lips moving silently. The descendants in shadow DNA studies hinted at what many suspected but dared not say. The bloodline had not ended. It had scattered, disguised among nearby towns, diluted but still present. Which neighbors carry it now, no one knows. It may be the farmer who avoids eye contact, the seamstress who hums old hymns, or the preacher's boy who spends too long staring at his sisters. The fear lies not in knowing who they were, but in not knowing who they are now. If the vow persists in silence, then any child could be born carrying both mother and aunt, father and brother, all bound in one. The swamp's hunger Rustwater remains the center. Hunters avoid it. Fishermen refuse to cast there. Children are warned never to play along its banks. For it is said that if you lean too close, the water reflects not your face but another's, pale, swollen with eyes too wide. Some reflections linger even when you step back. Those who dare to camp nearby report hearing the sound of vows carried across the water, spoken in 3 voices at once. One low, one steady, one trembling. The voices recite promises not of love, but of bondage, binding blood to blood, body to body, generation to generation. A group of teenagers once recorded these sounds, intending to prove them false. Their tape caught only static and the muffled cry of a child. When they played it back in town, the sound carried through the church walls, silencing an entire service. The preacher wept. The tape was destroyed. The last warning. What makes this story most disturbing is not its grotesque unions, nor even the children born from them. It is the possibility that the vow remains unfinished. The family swore that breaking the circle would bring ruin, that the swamp itself would claim them. But what if the circle was not broken? What if it only shifted outward, spreading into the valley, searching for new blood to bind? Some whisper that every few decades the swamp calls another family, that a man begins to look at kin differently, that a mother begins to see her daughter as a rival, that vows are whispered where they should never be, and once it begins, it does not end. Closing the circle, the house still waits. The swamp still stirs, and though the family that first began it may have burned, the echoes of their bonds continue. If you stand by Rustwater's edge at night, you may hear the vows yourself, spoken softly, insistently, as though inviting you to answer. The true horror is not that they sinned. The true horror is that their sin refuses to die. It waits, patient as the water, patient as the mud, patient as the blood. And if you listen too closely, you may find yourself repeating the words without meaning to. One blood. One bond, one breath,